But let's take you first to the dark side. Let's talk to you first about what actually is happening in our America in the age of Donald Trump. You know, let's be clear. The whole axiom of this administration, America first, make America great again, is dog whistle politics. It's a president who's hearkening back to a time when it was white, male, Christian America first. And that so much of what he's endeavoring to do is to kind of send a message to some folks who understand that he is engaged. They hear the dog whistle for what it is. And then you don't have to look too far to find the content of his policies and his priorities. I'm going to focus on three. This initial talk with some outline of remarks actually has 7. But I want to make sure I have time for us to engage. So I'm going to cut back to 3. And then I'm going to leave some issues that you can then engage me on questions afterwards. So I'm going to cover 3 of the front burner, high boil issues, as I talked about in the newspaper this morning. Immigration. It was the defining campaign promise from this president. So many of these promises had to do with immigration. Build the wall to keep the Mexicans out. Remember his clear language when he described Mexican immigrants as rapists and murderers, quote unquote. That was remarkable, was not the fact, was the lack of any qualification in that language. Not that some rapists and murderers were Mexican, or that some Mexicans were rapists and murderers, both of which could have been accurate, even if still inflammatory. But the fact that Mexicans, any and all, were rapists and murderers. So how did anyone ever get surprised by the president who then later on would say that there were nice people on both sides of the debate in Charlottesville, right? I've never met a nice Nazi. I don't know about you. There are not nice people on both sides of the debate. They're the good guys, that's us. And then there are the white supremacist Nazis who are, you fill in the blank, the wrong guys. And the idea that this president would surprise the nation with the moral equivalency by which he described both debates should not have surprised anyone if we remembered his comments about Mexicans. The most obvious and the most high profile of his xenophobic and nativistic policies came, of course, in the famous complete and total ban on Muslims from individuals entering the United States. Now, as Terry mentioned, we've been fighting it 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So far, so good. None of them have gone into effect. Every one of those Muslim bans, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, have been stopped by the courts, thanks in large part to litigation by the ACLU. Not exclusively, there are others also working on this issue. It takes many of us to fight some of these policies, but break it down. Right? He promised us on the campaign stump that he would have a complete and total ban on all Muslims. We took him both literally and seriously. We were the only organization in the country that had a plan for Trump as president before the election. We issued our report analyzing President Trump's policies, his promises, how they would rank for us in terms of priority, and how we would fight him. We issued that report in July of 2016, when no one thought he could be president. He had already clinched the nomination going into the convention, but no one thought he would actually win, the pundits and the press. I frankly didn't think he would win, but I was a little bit more neurotic than most folks. I wanted to have a plan in case he were to win. And so we spent a great deal of time analyzing how to fight the Muslim ban. When he indeed won, and then when he made good on that promise within 1 week of taking the oath of office, we had figured out the theories. We had reached out to sister organizations to find the proper plaintiffs. We had figured out the model pleadings. We had that all in the can so that we could file literally within 12 hours of him signing the executive order, we already had jumped into court. And within 26 hours, we had the first federal judge enjoining the implementation of the Muslim ban. Now, it got a little bit more challenging after that because they tried to get smarter and better. The Muslim ban 2.0 was then issued. We again then jumped back into court. They deleted some of the most egregious parts of the first Muslim ban. In the first Muslim ban, they had a specific carve-out to protect individuals of minority religions, i.e. Christians. When we first saw that in the first executive order that then they took out in the second executive order, lawyers have a very bizarre sense of joy. We were quite happy when we first saw it in the first executive order because it was so bad that it was good for us. She's like, are you crazy? There's no way they're going to keep this in the final order, right? The whole idea of the First Amendment is that you don't favor a religion and you don't discriminate against a religion. And when you actually have language that has a carve-out exception for one religion, it's just so patently and so clearly unconstitutional under the First Amendment that we thought, well, there's no way this will ever survive. We saw an earlier version of the executive order on Wednesday before the Friday. This White House still leaks like a sieve. Someone texted us a copy of the executive order. Don't know what number that's attached to. It's a beautiful little photograph. We read him like, well, this will have to go through some editing. And when it wasn't edited on that Friday, and then they did try to edit it on the second Muslim ban, the one who came to save us was our own president, who in his own tweets insisted that this was still indeed a complete and total Muslim ban. Ka-ching, right? Cut and paste into the complaint, right? And so that was what we were telling the judges in the second Muslim ban, that, you know, we have it on very good word from the president that this is still indeed a Muslim ban. He said it on Christian broadcast radio. So one of the great opinions coming out of the Muslim ban litigation was that of a judge who said that, you know, reasonable people, including reasonable judges, will have to make a decision based on the facts before them. And this is indeed what is before us. So when the third Muslim ban executive order comes through, and they really try to, quote, clean it up by adding the country of North Korea and adding the country of Venezuela, the government officials of Venezuela, you break it down for the judges again. Well, North Korea had 144 visitors to the United States last year. The ban on government officials from Venezuela would probably govern another dozen or two. So with those two countries, still at its core, it is still a Muslim ban. And that you cannot disguise or you cannot wipe away the original sin of an explicit executive order focused on a particular group articulating the animus that has been so clear from the president. And so that's why, ultimately, just even 3 weeks ago, we won a preliminary injunction against Muslim Ban 3.0. We think it will fail because reasonable people will look at the reasonable facts and circumstances and understand it for exactly what it is. But the immigration and the xenophobia, on the immigration issue, the xenophobia is obviously playing out in context broader than the Muslim ban. You've seen it with the escalation of detention and law enforcement efforts, especially here in places like Texas. We've seen numbers of people who are being detained have grown by more than 40% since the Trump administration took office. We've been hearing about raids at children's schools as parents drop them off for school, that parents get picked up. We hear about the increase of warrantless searches. We see the efforts of the Trump administration to fight sanctuary city jurisdictions, an issue playing out here in Texas, as Terry mentioned, in tomorrow's hearing in Louisiana. But it's also playing out in other places, in San Francisco and Santa Clara County, where we're working with the government officials in those jurisdictions to fight efforts to cudgel local law enforcement officials and local elected officials to toe the anti-immigrant party line. We've seen it play out in efforts as they begin to ramp up the enforcement efforts around the Dreamers. We have several lawsuits now, one out of Georgia and one out of Los Angeles on behalf of Dreamers whose work authorizations were being revoked without proper due process, really setting the ground, really setting the stage for the big battle which will come after March, when the Dreamer program will lapse unless enacted further by Congress. But you see all of these different pieces, you know, the language around Mexicans and immigrants broadly, the insistence on building a wall, 3 versions of an executive order, scaling up detention efforts, the targeting of the Dreamers, the rescission of the Dreamer program. Make no mistake, you know, all of these things clearly indicate exactly what this administration hopes to achieve, which is to make America white again, to purge this country of people from diverse countries and backgrounds. And the zeal with which they will pursue this is nowhere more evident than the great case that Terry and her colleagues just took up this week on behalf of a 10-year-old girl, Rosa Maria Hernandez, who suffered from cerebral palsy, who was traveling in an ambulance to a hospital in Corpus Christi to have gallbladder surgery, and that the Border Patrol agents stopped that ambulance and illegally detained her under the pretext that she is an unaccompanied minor, separated her from her parents. Agents at the checkpoints asked for proof of Rosa Maria's papers, and they escorted her and her cousin to Driscoll Children's Hospital, where they waited outside the room while she had surgery and immediately took her into custody upon discharge. This is the case of one young girl in one jurisdiction, in one really important state. But make no mistake, the zeal with which they have pursued this one enforcement case indicates the zeal with which they will double down on immigration enforcement more broadly. And that we should not think of these individual cases as the anomalies, that they in fact represent the vigor with which the government, Department of Homeland Security, the Justice Department, will turn the power of the federal government into its anti-immigrant and xenophobic force that we all fear it.